Hi friends, in today's video I'm giving you guys my best advice for coloured pencil, and this is going to be great especially if you're a beginner and looking into this exciting medium. I asked my Facebook group and my followers on Instagram what they struggle with the most when using or starting out with coloured pencils, so hopefully the advice in this video will help you. We're keeping this video real simple with a time lapse of a Highland cow which I drew a couple of months ago as a tutorial for my students. So one of the most common questions I got was actually about supplies, so we're going to cover that first. So first up in supplies is pencils. Now I got a lot of questions asking what is the best type of coloured pencils or what coloured pencil type should I be using, and the advice that I give to beginners is to purchase the best quality coloured pencils that you can afford. Opt for a polychromos or a luminance or something along that, and if you can't afford like a real artist grade quality like those pencils, then a good quality student grade pencil is good. So Prismacolors, the Derwent Coloursoft, even the Faber-Castell Goldfarbe pencils, they are absolutely amazing. You just need a good quality set of pencils that you can just practice your techniques and hone your skills with. You only really need a core set of 12 or so pencils as well. You don't need like the whole fandangled whole colour range of pencils to create a really good piece. You can mix a whole bunch of colours with just a standard set of 12 pencils. So for example, the 12 set of polychromos, you can mix so many different colours, you can get so many different tones, and you can actually create a really good piece just using that. I actually created a piece just using 3 coloured pencils. I'll link that as a card up above for you in case you want to check that out. And it just shows that you don't need a whole big range of coloured pencils. You don't even need like really expensive supplies to be able to create a really exciting and interesting piece. I also see a lot of beginners thinking that they can't start out with coloured pencils because they need such expensive supplies, but you really don't need to opt for a luminance or like a Derwent Lightfast pencil if you don't have the budget for that. The Derwent Colorsofts are a really good price, so are the Faber-Castell Goldfarbe. They're what I have been using recently and I can totally recommend those to beginners. Even the Arteza Expert coloured pencils, they're really good at just sort of getting to grips with coloured pencil, getting to know the techniques and getting to understand how the colour and the pencils are applied to paper. Speaking of paper, this is another common question I got. Everybody always asks me this whenever I do a live stream or anything like that. Everybody is always interested to know what paper you need to use for coloured pencil work. And again, similarly with the coloured pencils, you need to invest in a decent quality paper. You want to stay away from low GSM or weighted paper. Ideally use a smooth paper with a little bit of tooth. So I personally use the Fabriano Artistico hot pressed watercolour paper. That's my paper of choice in case anybody is wondering. But you just want to choose a decent quality paper like a Fabriano, a Strathmore, anything that's kind of decent and will hold a lot of layers. Generally, the higher the GSM or weight of the paper, the better it is at handling layers, so you really want to pay attention to that when you're choosing your paper. Now you can go ahead and use like a cartridge paper. That's good for practicing your techniques and getting to grips with your coloured pencils, perhaps swatching them out and things like that. And when it comes to doing a full coloured pencil piece, something like a cartridge paper or a printer paper, you're not going to be able to get as many layers as you want, and you're not going to be able to get the correct depth, and you're not going to be able to achieve exactly what you're wanting with your coloured pencil. You're going to see that you're going to be limited in the amount of layers and it's not going to work well for you, and that can be off-putting for beginners as well. I see a lot of beginners just using a cartridge paper and thinking, oh, they can't get enough layers, so they're just going to give up. But you just need to invest in a good quality paper, and I know paper can be expensive, but it really does make all the difference. And what I suggest as well is purchasing a paper sample pack. These are really good and they're relatively cheap as well, because paper works different for everybody. Everybody likes to work on a different surface depending on how they use and put pressure on their pencils. So purchasing a paper sample pack from Jackson's, I'll leave a link below to some of the ones that they do. Purchasing a pack like that allows you to just test out all of the different papers without having to splurge on a big pad of paper, because I know the pads of paper can be really expensive. So doing it that way is really cost effective, and you can try out a bunch and see which one you like. Another common question I got was sharpeners and how to keep your pencil sharp. So you just want anything that kind of gives you a really nice sharp point and doesn't break the pencil casings. So when you're choosing a sharpener, you want to make sure that you choose one that keeps your pencil casings really nice and smooth when you're sharpening. And you can tell when a sharpener is getting blunt because the pencil casing, the wood around the visible lead or the visible tip of the pencil, becomes a little bit furry. So that's when you need to replace your pencil sharpener, when you see that occurring on your pencils. Personally, I use a mechanical pencil sharpener. I use the Swordfish Icon, and that is really good at sharpening a whole range of different pencils. It's really good for the Prismas as well, because if you're familiar with them, you know that they often break, but I find that a mechanical pencil sharpens those really nicely, and you can sort of limit the damage that you do to your pencil, because I find that using a handheld sharpener can sometimes exert too much pressure on the pencil, and you kind of warp or bend it ever so slightly, and it can lead to breakages in the pencil case and damaging the core of the pencil as well. Another common question I got was how to avoid smudging on your work. Now, the main piece of advice I have for this is to work in the opposite direction from whatever hand you are. So if you're right-handed, you want to work from the left-hand side of your page to the right-hand side. And if you're left-handed, you want to do it the other way around. And that avoids you putting your hand on all of your lovely coloured pencil work and then smearing it across the nice clean paper. This is something that a lot of my beginner students do. They sort of just kind of work all over the place, but you just need to make sure that you work in a sort of meticulous way, making sure that you are working from the left to the right to avoid that smudging, because as soon as you get some sort of dirty mark on clean areas of your paper, it does become incredibly difficult to actually lift that off. So that's one way to avoid that. Another way to avoid that is to lean on something. So use something like a blank piece of printer paper, some glassine paper, even an old envelope or something like that. Something that is nice and clean as well, so that if you are working on an area that you have to put your hand on that you've already coloured with pencil, so you're not going to end up lifting the pigment with your hand and then transferring it to the clean area of your paper. By using something in between your hand and the paper, you keep your paper clean, but you also keep the paper free of any oils on your hand, which can sort of interfere with the colours and the laydown of the pencils on the paper. So use something to lean on to avoid that smudging as well. So the advice I've just given was for a majority of the questions that I got asked pertaining to materials and mainly smudging of the paper. So I'm just going to give you some general advice on what I think beginners should do when first starting out with coloured pencils. And the number one thing is to swatch out your coloured pencils. I've made a video on this. I highly recommend you go and check it out on how to create swatches and how you can kind of use them with your coloured pencil work when picking out colours and things like that. It's a really good exercise to do, especially when you get like a brand new set. Not only do you then have like a list of colours that you can easily reference, but you get hands-on experience with your coloured pencils with your brand new set. You get to see exactly how they work on your chosen paper, and it's just a really good exercise just to get that experience with your coloured pencils. So when you have swatched out your coloured pencils, like I said, you've got that hands-on experience, but then you've got a set of colours that you can use to pick colours from your reference photos. If you are familiar with certain coloured pencil brands, you'll know that the barrels of the pencils or the tips of the pencils don't always accurately represent the colour which is in the core of the pencils. So it's good to have that colour chart so you can get an accurate representation of the colour, so you know exactly which ones you're going to choose for your drawings. If you are brand new to coloured pencil and you feel a little bit daunted by kind of what things you should start off with drawing, what subject matter you should choose, I absolutely recommend before diving into a full subject or anything like that, that you practice layering with your coloured pencils. You practice using them, seeing how they lay down on paper and how they work on top of one another. You practice layering using different pressures, so using a lighter pressure, a harder pressure, seeing what kind of colours you can produce, and also experiment with holding your pencils in different positions, because if you hold your pencil quite far back towards the end, you can use it lightly and you get like a really nice glaze, a light wash of colour almost. And if you hold your pencil like really close to the tip, you can get some really nice precise details and some harder, sort of more dense looking colours. So you just want to experiment with those and really get to know your pencils and really get to know what they can do, what kind of colour combinations you can create. And I use a sketchbook for this, and I recommend that my students use a sketchbook to practice techniques before they dive into a full piece, because again, you just get that hands-on experience, you get to know ins and outs of all of your pencils, and you get to know what they're capable of for the techniques that you want to use. So you get to know exactly how you yourself uses your pencils and how you should hold them, how you should apply them to the paper to get the best results possible. One of the questions I got asked on my Facebook group was knowing when to stop, when you've gone too far, or when you need to continue working on your piece. Now, this is kind of like a multiple part answer, but first of all, you need to work past what we call the ugly stage. Now, this is when you're just putting down like your initial layers and everything just sort of isn't really working. It's not really pulling together as a piece, and everything kind of just looks rough and just looks ugly. It's why it's called the ugly stage. When you get to that part, you need to work past that. That's a stage when you're getting your coloured pencils down, you're kind of getting the form of the subject, but it's just not pulling together. You need to work past that. You need to continue layering and adding more coloured pencil to build up your piece. You really, really need to get past the mindset of this is ugly, I'm going to give up, and push it to the side. You need to work past that and you need to continue going. Once you've worked past that stage, you will see that everything really starts to come together and it starts to look a whole lot better the more coloured pencil layers that you add. I found this with the Highland Cow. I got through so many ugly stages, it's unbelievable. I felt like giving up on the Highland Cow multiple times, but you just need to push past that ugly stage and keep layering. So when you are feeling bad about your work, keep going and just see where it can go. So another part to that would be when you think that you need to add more detail into your drawings. Perhaps you really want to create a really detailed one, but it's just not quite getting there, but it's looking good overall. Don't be afraid to just stop. Don't be afraid to not add every single detail. Sometimes it's good to leave areas a little bit plain and not too detailed, especially if, say, you're drawing a dog or a cat and you want the focus to be on the eyes because they're really intense. You want to add like a lot of detail into the eyes because then that draws the eye, and then you want to kind of leave the rest of it kind of plain because then the whole focus will be on the eyes because there's loads of detail in there. So don't be afraid to not add every single detail that you add in a reference photo, and that goes for any subject like a human portrait or anything like that. Don't be afraid to not add every single detail. Look at your piece as a whole and identify if you need to stop working on it. If you like what you're seeing and you feel like adding detail isn't going to add too much value to the piece, then don't bother with it. Don't stress yourself out over not having every single detail that you're seeing in a reference photo on your colour pencil piece. So a couple of questions I got on my Facebook group were related to going dark or not being able to go dark enough or being afraid to go too dark with your coloured pencils. And you really need to not be afraid to go too dark in your shadows, because going too dark or going darker in your shadows leads to a good contrast, which builds the realism of a piece if that's what you're going for. So if you are drawing an animal or anything that has like a high level of shadow, don't be afraid to go too dark. I see a lot of beginner coloured pencil pieces where they've been afraid to just push the shadows a little bit extra because they're just worried about messing up the piece or it looking like too dark in value. But adding a little bit of extra punch to the shadows will really bring a realistic piece to life. So really don't be afraid to put too much pressure on your pencils and go that little bit darker. And again, to enable your coloured pencils to get really dark, don't be afraid to increase the pressure on your pencils in the shadow areas. Usually when you're drawing something that's like really dark and shadowy, you're not really going to want to use a lot of light layers because it's going to take you a long time to build up the shadows. So just increase the pressure on your pencil and get those shadows really nice and dark. I see a lot of beginner coloured pencil artists getting really confused over what colours they should use. They have this whole bunch of colours. They've like bought a whole set of pencils thinking that that's what they're going to need to create a really realistic or vibrant looking piece or a really interesting piece. But that's not necessarily always the case. As I said, you just really need like a core set of 12 pencils. And I always recommend to people when they have chosen a subject to pick colours beforehand, because it makes the process a whole lot easier. And not only then do you have colours that you know you're going to use and that you can sort of replicate throughout the whole thing. When you are working on multiple drawings, as I know a lot of you guys do, when you're working on those multiple drawings, you have that set of colours. You know exactly what colours you're going to need for that portrait. So when you've put one away, you need to pull another one out. You can pull out your colour palette that you have predefined, pick out those pencils, and you know exactly what colours have gone into the drawing so far. So you're not going to have to worry about matching up colours and finding the correct tones once again. It's so much easier to work from a limited palette and you're not sort of distracted by all of the other colours that you have in your kit. It's so much easier to get a nice cohesive looking piece. All of the colours are sort of used throughout the piece and it just brings a nice harmony to the whole portrait or whatever you're drawing, and it's honestly a really lovely way to work. So if you don't already use a limited colour palette for your pieces, I recommend that you give it a try and see how you find it. Using a limited palette is also good for mixing colours and finding different blends of colours. It's so easy just to pick out a colour from your coloured pencil kit and use it straight out, but often using two different coloured pencils and combining them to create your own colour gives a much nicer result. Much like painting, like using watercolours, you would mix colours from your palette to create a different colour. It's the same with coloured pencils. You want to apply that same principle and use a limited colour palette to create a nice harmony in your piece. So one of the last questions that I had was how to get rid of the grain of the paper and to get that kind of nice slick coloured pencil, almost kind of like painterly look. And the answer there is to use a lot of layers or to use a harder pressure on your pencils in certain areas. Ultimately, coloured pencils is a practice of patience. They are a real sort of labour of love kind of medium. You just need to layer them up and you need to let them work with one another and blend seamlessly. And eventually, by having that many layers down, you will eliminate the grain of the paper. You'll get that really nice smooth look. It's not always necessary to get rid of the grain of the paper 100%. In my drawings, I like to leave a little bit of the grain of the paper. I find that when I'm drawing fur or kind of like fluffy, kind of suede-y kind of textures, that the grain of the paper actually helps. So I don't always like to eliminate the grain of the paper. So you need to evaluate your textures in your piece and decide whether you need to actually get rid of that grain of paper or whether you need to leave it in there. And also just identify your personal style as well. Everybody has a different working style. As I said, I like to leave mine sort of almost a little bit grainy so you can tell that it's a drawing. Some people like a really painterly smooth look, and that's okay. So you need to identify what kind of style that you like the look of, and if you like that really smooth look, just layer and layer and increase the pressure on your pencils as you layer up to get that really nice smooth area. I had a ton of other questions that related to drawing wildlife specifically, but I wanted to keep this video kind of generic to coloured pencil. But let me know in the comments if you'd like another video which gives beginner tips on drawing animals. I think that one would really help a lot of you, as this channel is really geared towards animals, so I feel like it would help some of you, but let me know in the comments below. But thank you so much for watching this one. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, and if you're new here, hit that sub button, tick the bell icon, and enjoy all the other coloured pencil related content that I release each week for you guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!